Good morning, everybody. Hey. Wakanda forever! Who doesn't know what Wakanda is? Let's start there. We've got one hand in the back. All right, I'm going to deal with you throughout the morning. It's a fantastic opportunity to be here again and to spend a bit of time speaking to you about a couple of different things. Today I'm going to give a little bit of insight into what I think is an important intersection between humanity and technology and exactly what that means. Hopefully throughout the presentation there'll be some moments of truth where you start to reflect personally on where your business and your enterprise are at, but also as marketers and brand builders, just trying to wrap your head around the things that are happening. Kind of the bottom line is that people are freaking the freak out. Right? Does anybody kind of get this sense that people are not really sure about what's going to happen? The reason why they're freaking out is that there's three paths that have started to intersect. And these three paths that have started to intersect have created a lot of discomfort for a lot of different people. In 1805, there was an algorithm created by a guy called André-Marie Legendre called the Gus-Legendre algorithm. This was the beginning of kind of an explosion of algorithmic equations, starting with 25 iterations of a number that produced 45 million versions of the number pi. The second thing that we started seeing happening is that in the 1990s, there was an explosion of data related and solely due to the World Wide Web. Now there's a law, Zack Bergs Law. Mark Zuckerberg says that every single year, Facebook consumers will produce double the amount of content that they produced the year before. So Zuckerberg's law says that the content available online will essentially continue to grow ad infinitum. The challenge is the ability to consume that content will slowly taper out. And then the last thing that we see is that with this explosion of technology and with this development of algorithmic capability, we've got also this amazing computing power that has started to become mainstream and available to every single person. And as these three paths started to intersect, we realized that there were lots of opportunities that came as a result of it, but we also started to see that very specific industries sprung up because of it. Now this number over here, 2.5 quintillion bytes of data being produced every single day. Right? So 1 billion is how many zeros? 9. 1 trillion is how many zeros? 12. 1 quadrillion is how many zeros? 15. A quintillion is 18 zeros of data being produced every day. So here's a scenario. Imagine picking up the phone. Hello, President. How many electronic pieces of data are being produced every single day? Well, I think they must be 2.5 2.5 Hey, Cyril! 2.5 quintillion megabytes of data. That's a lot of data, bottom line. We also see that the number of mobile devices has surpassed the number of human beings on this planet. In fact, more people have mobile devices than have toothbrushes. It's a little bit sad. It's a little bit sad, but it's our reality. We also know that for the first time, AlphaZero beats AlphaGo. Now, those of you that are tech geeks and follow the tech world, you'll know that these two technologies are built by Google and the DeepMind laboratories in the UK. So essentially what AlphaZero was, it was an algorithm that didn't have to learn anything from scratch. So the data input that gives machine learning what they need to be able to learn wasn't inputted into AlphaZero, and AlphaZero still managed to beat AlphaGo without learning from scratch. So it iterated on its own knowledge. All right? So as these paths converge, it's no wonder why people are freaking the freak out, right? And I think amongst all of this information, and I'm not going to bore you with statistics, I try and kind of find the trees from the forest because it's important. And as I try and find the trees from the forest, one thing keeps on coming up, and it's a very simple premise, is that the only thing that's going to continue to make us become the top of the food chain is acceptance and knowledge that humanity is actually the new black. And when we think about humanity in the context of all these amazing numbers and all these big opportunities, it has to be the thing that equalizes all the stuff that we do. Because if it isn't, then we've got a big problem. Another very interesting thing that we need to consider when we look at humanity is we need to think about this notion about doing good for business. Now, I know we've probably got some tree huggers in the audience, and I know we've got some capitalists in the audience, but we need to speak about this notion about being human and how it is intrinsically linked to being good for business. There's two graphs I want to share with you. The first one is called the Human Development Index. Has anybody heard of this number? It's a number between 0 and 1. Lots of clever people from all over the world crunch all sorts of numbers, and they put it together, and they start to give a rating for different regions across the world. So what you'll notice about this graph over here is that you'll see there's a number of different regions on the right-hand side, and all of them seem to be slanting up and to the right. We on the same page? What is the other thing we notice? We notice that the bottom, unfortunately, is still sub-Saharan Africa, which means that if you take all of the regions across the world and you try and compare where the state of human wellness is best, it is not here. Another graph which is interesting to consider was defined by a guy called Gordon Moore. Now, he was part of the Intel group that started to create Intel processors, and they defined this as the kind of exponential increase in the capability of a microchip. So if you look at the printing press right through to where we're at now in terms of 3D chips and all that kind of stuff, you'll see this really sexy curve that a lot of VCs spend a lot of money looking for, right? It's the J curve. It's the innovation curve. That's the curve that's the money curve, right? If your business is doing this kind of thing, they love what you're doing. So this curve essentially speaks about the fact that technology will get better and better over time. The challenging thing is that if you compare the one curve to the other, I find it quite disheartening that the state of human development is only increasing incrementally, but the way we're adopting technology and the problems we're solving is increasing exponentially. That creates what we call the Kalenga conundrum. How is it possible that we are sending people to the moon, but we can't feed people on Earth? How is it possible that we're trying to solve such complex problems when we haven't even gotten the basics of being humans right? It's a huge challenge, and I think it's a challenge because our fundamental business models have to respond to this challenge. It is no longer just sufficient to grow revenue. You have to be able to change lives before you grow revenue in this order. And it's not me who's saying this. If you look around the world at the wealthiest families, the Rothschilds, the House of Saud from Saudi Arabia, all of them have started shifting their investments and their funding to this new and sexy thing called impact investments. Now, those of you that know the finance world, impact investments is simply a sexy way of saying, put your money in a way, or place your money in a way that it changes lives before you grow your revenue. Now, why would all these wealthy people want to shift their money to all these kind of seemingly tree-hugging initiatives? Well, it's simple. If you do not preserve humanity on our planet, it means that you do not have a market to service in the next couple of years, right? Unless you're like my friend Elon, and you're planning to have interplanetary revenue streams on your balance sheet, you're probably quite constrained to this planet for a good piece of time. So we have to change lives before we grow our revenue. Another very important thing to notice is that in Africa, we've got lots of examples of businesses that have tried to understand this and build technology to figure this out. We've got a lot of problems in sub-Saharan Africa. That graph I showed you about the Human Development Index, it's a sad graph, but it's also a really expiring graph. Because while we've got lots of stuff to solve for, it means like businesses like Spaza App, like Zipline, and like even M-Pesa, which yes, yawn, we've seen a lot of times, but are solving key problems that are going to unlock the future of our continent. I want to show you a quick video which gives a great sense of how you can take some really basic technology, how you can understand a simple, very key problem, and solve it to be able to be more human.
Rwanda is known as the land of 1,000 hills.
It is a very difficult country in terms of topography, and many areas are hard to reach.
Traversing that terrain to get to a rural village can take hours, even though it's a very short distance.
Today, if a mother is giving birth and suffers from postpartum hemorrhaging, her life is dependent on getting a blood transfusion.
There are many different types of blood types. They have a limited shelf life. And the challenge is when you need blood, you need it immediately. But it is unpredictable which geography that will occur in.
Hospitals that are in more remote areas can have a very hard time getting enough reliably supplied blood.
The time to order and get the supplies by truck is just too late.
There's no way that we can overcome the time that it takes to get anywhere during the rainy season. And people would say, okay, during the rainy season, we're just not going to make it.
The best case scenario, it would take at least 4 hours. But with Zipline, we are looking at cutting that 4 hours to something like 15 minutes.
It is a team of Rwandese who came together with Zipline to groom the project and to make it happen in Rwanda.
Their ultimate vision is to put each and every one of those 11 million citizens within a 15 to 35-minute delivery of any essential medical product that they could need. And that's a revolutionary idea for any country in the world.
The use of drones to deliver life-saving medical products can overcome the lack of road infrastructure. We need to let our imagination soar.
When you have a commodity, rare in supply, that might be an unusual blood type or something like a rabies vaccine, and you need it immediately, the idea that we could use a drone to be able to deliver this to the country is absolutely brilliant. There's nothing else that could do that in that way.
It is like we will no longer go around hills, but we fly over the hills.
We've pulled together a team from places like Boeing, SpaceX, Google, Lockheed Martin.
And it's an honor for Zipline to partner with the government of Rwanda.
We place a hub next to an existing medical warehouse, and it instantly enables that warehouse to make hundreds of deliveries per day to any location within range.
The doctor sends us their order by text, by phone call, whatever's convenient.
Somebody identifies the need and then prepares the package, puts it on a drone.
Then we take that vehicle and we put it through pre-flight tests. It's launched, it flies automatically out to the clinic.
The path has been already calculated, it's in the computer.
And then they'll receive a text message saying, "Zip is 2 minutes away, please walk outside."
It drops the packet. Somebody goes and collects it.
It turns around, it flies home, and then we get it ready for the next delivery.
Our service not only makes it possible, but also affordable for countries to deliver reliable access to essential medicines for all of their citizens.
What we are looking forward to see here is saving lives.
This isn't a small step forward. This is a transformational change to how we provide medical care to people across the world.
That's pretty cool, right? And in the video, there are all these moments where I kind of have these Wakanda moments. Did you see that, like the hills and the rolling valleys? And for those of you who still don't know what Wakanda is, I will explain it, but it's actually quite an emotional thing, right? When you see countries like Rwanda partnering with different businesses to solve these problems. And the interesting thing is about our country and about our continent is that it's becoming almost the drone testing a de facto region of the world because of our topography. And I spent some time with insurance companies trying to advise them about some opportunities here. And I'll tell you a quick story. My wife was unfortunately involved in a car accident probably about 6 months ago. She was rear-ended by this car. And as the car hit the back of her tow bar, a signal was sent off to Discovery because they got this thing that measures the G-force that's on your car. And as the message went out to Discovery, they called and they said, "Are you okay?" And I said, well, when I was speaking to the Discovery execs, I said, wouldn't it be amazing if as soon as that accident happened and you've detected G-force, the same message that goes to your call center gets distributed to a drone station. And you deploy a drone to come and take pictures of the entire scene, you categorize those pictures and you send them off to my wife via WhatsApp and to your call center so that by the time she gets back in her car, her claim has been logged. Wouldn't that be cool? But do they listen to me? Anyway, we wait. But there's an African proverb that speaks about lifting as you rise, which is our fundamental responsibility as marketers, brand builders, and creators of enterprise and value. Lifting as you rise is a philosophy which I'm going to spend a lot of time speaking about. And this movie that came up earlier with the young lady who was speaking about Black Panther as a really kind of monumental step and moment in African history is kind of about this notion. When we talk about lifting as you rise, I believe that technology has got the ability to completely reframe reality. And in the movie Black Panther, it's kind of this mythical place, a city that was pretty much preserved from external influence that managed to find a precious commodity called Vilibrium, and they mined it, and they managed to create technology advances. They maintained their own integrity in terms of their society and their community, but they were able to advance in leaps and bounds. And in this advancement, they were able to secure themselves as a species, but they were also able to start impacting advances that were rapidly developing and acknowledging and embracing innovation and technology. And the way they approached the movie was to try and give a kind of a microcosm of what if it was possible for African countries to be so independent in such a way that they could drive their own agenda and set the narrative for themselves. By adopting technology and actually being able to reframe realities, I think there's two simple things to keep in mind. The first is that a few things will not ever change. And the one that I believe is going to be our saving grace is that technology should always be the slave to humanity. Did you hear me? Technology should always be the slave to humanity. Imagine a scene. 1,000 years ago, Musa playing in the vast plains of the Sahara, throwing rocks at his friend. And they throw rocks at each other, and I catch it, and I throw it back at him, and he catches it, throws it back at me, and I drop the rock. The rock drops, and it strikes another rock. And what do? I grunt, because I'm a Neanderthal at that point. Work with me. And I pick up the rock, and I throw it back, and he throws it back, and it drops. And what I see is that the contact between the two rocks produces a spark. I then take the rocks, and I hit them together again, and there's a spark. I take another material, I take a twig, and I take a piece of hay or grass, and I rub them together, and I see there's something happening. And over time, as I start engaging with this rudimentary technology, I realize that friction between two corrosive, what are these things called? Surfaces, creates friction. And over time, as I start engaging with this technology, I realize that actually I can create a fire. And when I go to sleep at night and we're all huddled around a fire, I realize that I protect humanity, because what happens? The lions come around and they see a fire and they disappear. Previously, they'd come around and it would be dark and they'd have a feast. But I've started to preserve humanity. I then realize that by this fire and by this spark, I can actually cook food. What does this mean? It means I go out and I hunt a gazelle and I kill it. Now I don't have to eat it within 14 hours. I have to cook it and preserve it. And because of the flame and because of what I can do, it now preserves humanity. And over the years, as we figure out the technology and we build on it, it actually is something that starts to be a slave to us as human beings. And things haven't fundamentally changed, because we've now got these devices that sit comfortably in our pockets. And these devices are very much the same as that rock that gets thrown and the flint that sparks, because what happens when you want to eat something and you live in Parkhurst? Take out your phone and you order Uber Eats, right? What happens when you're traveling to Cape Town and you've packed your bag of water and you want to go find a place to stay? You take out your phone and you look for Airbnb, right? So the technology hasn't changed. We're still using it as human beings to try and solve our core problems. And we have to make sure that at the intersection of those two things, we're still creating meaningful solutions. Because if we aren't, I'm afraid that we're not going to be able to preserve humanity, and I'm afraid we won't be able to have a humanity to serve. Now, while I'm a capitalist at heart and I believe winning, yes, is important, and it should be very much the objective of everything we do, I'm putting it to you today that changing lives is much better, and that should be the spirit in which we do everything that we do. And I'm going to have a little bit of a moment now, because I'd like for you to indulge me, because I think there's a few things that we need to speak about as an industry, as Africans, and as South Africans. There's a model I've put together called the PET model, and it's a model that starts to challenge what impactful marketing is all about. And impactful marketing has to start with this premise around empathy, all right? And at the core of this model is empathy. Now, empathy is very different from insight, right? There's a lot of you probably in this room who are marketers, advertisers, and brand. Yeah, I know what empathy is. Yeah, it's insight. Yeah. No. Insight is a commercial application of trying to be empathetic, right? Insight is, what do they do on a Saturday? Bobby, let's get into a taxi and go to Vilakazi Street to find out what they do on a Saturday. What do they do when they're chilling? Jane, let's do an immersion to Mzoli's and find out what they do when they're chilling. And then they burn Mzoli's down. Did you guys see that? Empathy is very different to insight. Insight is the commercialized application of empathy. You know how you know that? Because you can outsource insight. You can't outsource empathy. Empathy is the authentic ability to step into someone's scenario and feel what they feel. And if you don't have it, find people who do. Because if you don't have empathy at the core of everything that you're doing, it doesn't matter how much persuasion you wrap your business, your story, your whatever it is in. If it's not rooted in empathy, you've got a problem. And then we get into the situation where we've got this wonderful thing called technology that takes your empathy and your ability to persuade and it amplifies it. But once again, if you've got your empathy wrong, my friends at Dove, if you've got that wrong, H&M, If you've got that wrong, then technology is actually your worst nightmare. So if you're going to be approaching businesses in the 21st century and trying to get new African consumers, understanding Afrocentrism, understanding Afrofuturism, all that, be empathetic. And if you do not have it, find people that do. Last thing, and please, once again, indulge me. We're in a very exciting industry, but we're in a very untransformed industry, right? It's going to go very quiet. There's the inner circle and there's an outer circle. Do we know this? If I'm speaking rubbish, feel free to throw something at me. There's an inner circle and there's an outer circle. And then the people will straddle in between those two worlds. To the inner circle, there's been a lot of time and there's been a lot of patience afforded to allowing a process of diversification and transformation. See, I believe that diversity is the end destination and transformation is simply a stopping point on the way there. And to the inner circle who have found it very difficult to transform, it's going to get increasingly harder for you to continue to exist. It's not me speaking, it is the rules of the world. If you look at data, if you look at all the research that's been conducted by every single high-performing team across all sorts of industries in the world, the one thing that sets all of them apart is their ability to be diverse at their core. So if you're interested in surviving, you need to diversify. There's a saying. There's a saying, a Nigerian saying. It says, in times of panic, the foolish build dams and the wise build bridges. And to the core and to the inner circle, I appeal to you, start building those bridges. Because the survival of your industry and your business requires you to have people that have a different view and different understanding of the world. Recently, there was a tribunal released a result around the colluding that happens within the media space. The colluding which comes from a fundamental principle that you are building a dam to keep other people out. It will not fly. To the outer circle, and I saw a number of them on the program earlier. It's good to see. Keep your eyes focused on value, because I think value is the one thing that you cannot question and you cannot take away. To the outer circle, keep yourself fresh, keep yourself relevant, and keep yourself persistent. Because I believe that if you continue to do that over time, you may get lucky and you may be able to penetrate the inner circle, but you may also, at some point, do what I've endeavored to do, BYOI. Build your own ish. And this is not an exact art. This is going to be a bit of science, and it's going to be a little bit of art. And those of you that straddle between the inner circle and the outer circle, have robust conversations. Transformation is not an overnight journey. It's a robust engagement over time. And if you've got the ability and you've got the privilege of being in inner circle conversations, make sure that you make yourself proud. If you've got the ability to be in outer circle conversations, make sure that you keep inspiring people at their core. Because I think collectively, if we work together, we've got an exciting road ahead of us. But the current state of affairs is not encouraging from a diversity perspective. And I really wanted to take you into confidence to make you understand that things are going to change and things have to change. And change doesn't have to be enforced, it has to be embraced. And I'm excited about it. And I really hope as we move towards this change, it'll help us to actually act a lot more like humans before we think like brands. Thank you.